Okay, so this is Elena, and I'm continuing my presentation on the book Education from Ellen G. White, and this is where we left off the last time that we were together. So I would like to just go back to this particular slide and tell you that real or true education, God's method, lets the learner understand the redemption of men, from the fall to redemption. We see in nature beauty and color, as you see here. Now, the earth, marred and defiled by sin, reflects dimly the Creator's glory. It is true that his object lessons are not obliterated. Nature still speaks of her Creator. Yet these revelations are partial and imperfect. In our fallen state, we are incapable of interpreting aright. We need a fuller revelation of God himself, the God that God has given in his written word. So we can learn lessons from nature, but also from his written word. We are, in our fallen state, are incapable of interpreting aright. So together with nature and God's word, we can understand God's method for us. Every human being created in the image of God is endowed with a power akin to that of the Creator. Individuality, power to think and to do. It is the work of true education to develop this power, to train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other man's thoughts. So the object of true education is to return or to give man the individuality that God intended for them to have from the beginning. It's the power to think and to do. So what was the first school? The first school was in Eden. And if we look at the first school, who was the teacher? We're going to look at that in a minute. The system of education instituted at the beginning of the world was to be a what? Was to be a model for man throughout all after time. Through when? All after time. And who was the teacher? Christ. Who was the students? Well, the nature was the schoolroom, and the students were the humans. So this is the ideal in the Eden School. He gave us the model, a very simple three-step process. Christ is the teacher, nature is the schoolroom, humans are the students. Well, how would that model transfer to our time? The family is the school. The parent are the teachers. The experiences of life is the schoolroom, and the students are the children themselves. To Adam and Eve was committed the care of the garden, to dress it and to keep it. Genesis 2:15. Now remember, the garden was perfect in its state. Though rich in all that the owner of the universe could supply, they were not to be idle. They were not to be idle. Useful occupation was appointed them as a blessing, to strengthen the body, to expand the mind, and to develop the character. Education, page 21. So they were not to be idle. That is a problem in our society, to be idle. Satan's deception was that a knowledge of good mingled with evil would be a blessing, but it brought pain and death. Satan did not let it appear that by transgression he had become an outcast from heaven. He did not let it appear. He hid it. Did not let it appear. Again, did not let it appear that by his transgression he had become a what? Outcast from heaven. So he wanted Ellen White, Adam and Eve, to transgress because they would become an outcast from the Garden of Eden. But he did not let that appear. He just said that mingling good with evil was good, but obviously it brought pain and death. So what is this pain and death? It's the curse of sin. No longer were they to dwell in Eden in its perfection, for in its perfection it could not teach them the lessons which it was now essential for them to learn, because nature was to teach them the lesson. It could not teach them the lessons because it was perfect, and they had transgressed. The curse of sin had come upon the world in decay and death. So now, we, in our time, and for all times after the fall, in nature, which now revealed the knowledge of both good and evil because Adam and Eve sinned, and now everything outside of Eden was mingled with good and evil, man was to continually receive what? Warning as to the results of sin. As we can see in this picture, the results of sin. This is a warning to us. Every time we look upon nature and we see pain, decay, or some kind of death, or some kind of fear or sorrow that it brings upon, we know that this is a warning to us of the results and the consequences of sin. As we see the scars on the trees. This is a warning to us of the results of sin. Pain, death, decay. The results of sin, pain, death, and decay. We see it in the ever-fading flowers. The beautiful flowers that we look upon will fade and die. This is the result of sin and is a warning to us of the consequences of it. The wrinkles that come from age. This is all to remind us of the results of sin. So, true education is not just technical knowledge. We just saw in the previous slides that nature teaches us lessons. That's true education. What we just did is learn lessons from nature. And it's beautiful. It's refreshing that we don't have to wait to be in a classroom and have other man's thoughts telling us what to think, because God has placed those lessons around us in our experiences in nature, in His Word, and we are being able to form our individuality because we're able to use our minds by God's inspiration. So true education is not just technical knowledge. It inspires. Inspires what? Something that we've lost in our world today. It inspires to principles of truth, obedience, honor, integrity, and purity. Something that this world sometimes looks upon as weak qualities. So there were precious lessons that were taught to Israel during their sojourn at Sinai. This is taken, of course, from lessons from the Bible. And this was a period of what? Special training. Special training for the inheritance of Canaan. This special training was God's school for Israel as they sojourned through Canaan. Now, aren't we sojourning through this planet through our experience, and aren't we also receiving special training for our inheritance into the heavenly Canaan? So what was their training? Let's first see what happened. They were receiving special training. We're receiving special training, but what happened to them? The people were slow to learn the lesson. Are we not slow to learn the lesson too? So what was the special training? The first thing that he introduced to them when they left the desert, when they left Egypt to the desert, was a change in diet. The health principle was introduced to them because he knew that the body and the mind had to be clear for the training that he would be giving them. The sanctuary was a whole, it's a whole economy. It's a whole training within the sanctuary in the desert. They had an industrial school because they were able to develop all these things to build the sanctuary, and it took industry to be able to do that. And they had to do it through cooperation. Not only cooperation with God himself, but cooperation with each other. So he teaches this cooperation in the special training they received. Organization and leadership. We know that Moses wasn't the only leader. There were other leaders within the camp, leaders of hundreds, of 50s, and so forth, like governors. And this organizational leadership was part of their training. Administration. There was order in the camp. Sanitation, health, need, and helplessness, because those who were in need and needed help, this was taught. And pardon from sin. All special training that God gave the Israelites in the sojourn in the desert. So the school of the prophets was part also of that education. The Israelites developed schools, and they were called schools of the prophets. And in these schools, what was taught? This is God's true education. This is what was taught. Agricultural work. Agricultural work being the field, crops, growing, self-sustaining. Also mechanical work, how to work with your hands, how to fix things, how to build things, therefore turning these into trades. And so the people, the kids who grew up being able to sustain themselves. Knowledge of practical life. The law of God written in the mind and the heart. Sacred history, sacred music, poetry, service of the sanctuary, and prayer. So the sacred history was illustrations of the results of true education. Again, the results of those men in the past who followed true education. These are the lives of the great men: Joseph, Daniel, Moses, Elijah, Paul, obviously Jesus. So the master teacher, he had stood. Jesus is the master teacher. He had stood in the councils of the Most High. What master teacher than that? In him was found the perfect ideal. He came to show how on earth men are to practice the principles and to live the life of heaven. That is the master teacher, so why not listen to him? Well, so what was his education when he was on earth? Well, he was always involved in useful work. Carpentry, helping his parents, helping those in his community. He also studied the scriptures and nature. He spent a lot of time in nature, but he also read the scriptures and his experiences of life. This was God's education. In the presence of such a master teacher, who was in the counsels of God himself, with such an opportunity for us to receive divine education straight from heaven, what worse than folly is it to seek an education apart from him? There is no education apart from God. Seek to be wise apart from wisdom. Isn't God wisdom? How can we be wise without him? But yet we claim to be more wise than he is. To be true while rejecting truth. This is folly. To seek illumination apart from light. He is the light. Apart from Christ, there is no illumination. And to exist in this life without the life giver. So what was Christ's methods? His methods were all personal association. This is how he taught. This is his method of education. So if we want to follow the master teacher, then we would incorporate the same principles, which is personal association. He became friends with those around him, and he taught them through that personal association in the house, at the table, in the closet, in the field, on his journeys. He shared his trials and hardships on the mountainside and beside the sea. This was Christ's method of teaching. He became a friend to those who were around him and was teaching constantly. It wasn't just in a classroom. it was everywhere. And eventually, these became the family of Jesus. So I'm going to stop here on this video presentation and let you know the next time we meet on part 3, I will explain the lessons of life, the great law of life. What is the great law of life? It is the great lesson of life that will be here and in the heaven to come. So when that part 3 comes up, I will share that with you. Thank you for your attention. See you at part 3.